Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Onward Ozarks, brought to you by the Northwest Arkansas Council. I'm Randy Wilburn, host of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, and I'm thrilled to be with you all today. In May, our community faced a significant challenge when a powerful tornado struck Benton County and parts of Washington County. The aftermath was a true test of our region's resilience and the strength of our local leadership. Today, we are joined by three leaders at the forefront of the response efforts: Bentonville Mayor Stephanie Orman, Rogers Mayor Greg Hines, and Benton County Judge Barry Moerhing. These leaders worked tirelessly to coordinate swift, effective responses, bringing together emergency services, community organizations, and countless volunteers to help us recover quickly and safely. Their collaborative approach not only mitigated the immediate impact, but also showcased the power of a regional cooperation and community spirit in times of crisis. Today's discussion will give us a unique opportunity to hear directly from them about what happened, the decisions they made, and how they led their teams through the aftermath of the tornado. They'll share insights on the challenges faced, the successes achieved, and the lessons learned that can help us better prepare for the future. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mayor Orman, Mayor Hines, and Judge Moerhing. Thank you all for being here, and let's dive into this important conversation. But before we start, I just want to remind you of some housekeeping rules. We've got some wonderful gift cards for some of the participants today that are listening to this. So you have to stay tuned. At 9:30, I'm going to announce two Walmart gift cards that we'll give away. And then at 9:45, again, we'll have two more gift cards. So please stick with us to the end. I think you're going to enjoy this program. It's going to be a really great discussion, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all these folks. And so one of the things that I wanted to do right away was I wanted to ask, and this is really a question that's open to all of the panelists. Were cities and counties prepared for an event like we saw in May? I mean, I don't know how you could prepare, but there has to be. Was there an official playbook or official storm disaster response plan? And if so, can you talk about how that helped with a more swift and efficient response? And for the audience, I know that is a major, major question. It's one that has a million different answers, but I think that these three panelists can definitely shed some insight on how they looked at this 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 destruction and this storm from their perspective. And so we'll go ahead and start. And I'd love for Mayor Hines, why don't you start first and share your thoughts about this?
Sure, that's it's a great question, and it's one that we could literally spend the entire hour on. But in short, yes, all cities, counties are mandated by law to have disaster relief plans in place, and cities, while they're not, unless they're audited by the legislative audit, which we do private audits, so we're not. We certainly have that playbook. I will tell you that what we learned in the aftermath is that that needs some major updating. That's really a much more fluid document than maybe what was previously thought. But really, I think not in the first 24 hours, but in the hours after that, sort of the communication component. I think we learned a lot through COVID on how to communicate and how to keep functions happening through city government without being together in the same building. And of course, we didn't have power for over a week here at City Hall. So I think, the two things collided well. But at the end of the day, I will say this. I've been doing this 25 years. I've been in law enforcement for a long time. It's kind of the Mike Tyson thing. Everybody's got a great plan until they get socked in the face. And we got punched in the face.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now that we've had a Mike Tyson reference, I think we'll be able to. I mean, that's a good one. I like that. Mayor Orman, do you want to share your thoughts from Bentonville's perspective and from what you and your office experienced with this event?
Sure. Well, I just want to say, I think the knowledge within our teams, it all came together that evening. And I think when you've got sort of the talent and the employees behind it, when you get them in a room, Bentonville, each of the cities are set up a little bit different. So we all knew where our command center was. We knew that we needed to get there immediately after the storm. And so we all met there. Our command center is connected to our dispatch center. So it's also where all of our calls are coming in. So immediately all the department heads dispatch to that. And then what happens from that point is you're immediately worried about the public, right? The safety. And so you start with that piece of it, and then you go down the list, and there's a list, there's a way to work any emergency, but there's also, you have to be flexible. There's unexpected things. You have to know where it's happening in your city. And so I think from my perspective, it was just really impressive to see our teams come together. They knew what to do when they got in that room, and each of the departments took on their responsibilities. And we saw I think over 800 calls come in that night of the storm, and we immediately went to work, and our teams didn't stop working that entire first week. Pretty much everybody was working around the clock. So I just think that there is a plan, but you have to be flexible with that plan, and you have to have the relationships and the knowledge with your team leads to make sure that it can be executed. And I just was really proud of our team and everybody, and that communication with the county, with the other cities as well. We had mutual aid coming in across the board. And so having those relationships and being able to know that you can count on other cities to work with you, I think was really an amazing part of the process to just watch unfold and to be part of that leadership team that just got it done.
Yeah. And speaking of which, the way you led us into that was perfect. I think it's great that we saved Judge Moerhing for last, because you have actually a little bit of a different perspective about what you focus on, Judge. And I'd love for you to share your thoughts based on what Mayor Orman just shared in terms of how you had to view this storm and tornado.
Sure. And first of all, thanks for hosting this event, Randy and the Northwest Arkansas Council. Appreciate that. I know we've all had the opportunity to speak to the Rotary clubs or Kiwanis clubs, et cetera, about what happened, but this is one of the more broad-based regional forums that we've had, and I appreciate it. You know, Greg alluded to it. We do have an emergency operations plan for the county, and every disaster is different. I've been through a few of these now. I don't have quite as long experience as Greg does at this. But we've had two presidential declared disasters, this one and the flood of 2017, and they're both remarkably different. And the preparation really, I think, to Stephanie's point, is who do you have on board? Who are your people? Who are your key point of contacts? And from that perspective, I think we did a pretty good job going into the storm and in those first couple of days coming out of the storm. My perspective is a little more regional. I had a lot of outreach to the west side in the Decatur area, Hobbs State Park, what was happening over in the Montanay area, even into Little Flock. So our jurisdiction in the county perspective is a little more regional in nature. And we also have a different kind of disaster in the county. I mean, if you look at what Rogers and Bentonville had to deal with, that disaster in a city is so much different. You have more businesses impacted. You have more sheer destruction of structures. Ours was a lot more remote, farm, agriculture, debris on county roads. We had 370 miles of roads that had debris on them. And so going to your question about, is there a plan? I wouldn't say there's a specific bullet point A, B, C, and D, because we found out that doesn't really work in disasters. What you have to have is the right people, the right teams, and the right connections so that people react in the appropriate way. And I was really proud about how our first responders, our road departments, our street departments in our cities, our utilities, man, I thought the response was outstanding. And I think, that's where I think we excelled. I also think we excelled ahead of the storm. We were really, as horrible as this storm was, we were really lucky. And we continuously encourage the public, pay attention to the weather. get your own form of weather notification, whether it's, getting a download from a local TV station or weather radio or BCO, or make sure you're on top of the weather. And when I'd visit out on the west side of the county and see what's happened to some of those homes, those farms, I'm just amazed that more people weren't hurt or tragically killed out there. We didn't have anything out there, but the destruction was immense. So that means people in this area were somewhat prepared as well. I think what we learned is we learned of pockets out by the lake and otherwise that maybe people weren't as prepared, and hopefully people pay even more attention next time because we got really lucky. But to answer your question, I think our people were prepared. Our communication across the county, I think, was in really good shape and prepared. We were talking, amongst ourselves that night and into that day. And so I think from that perspective, we did a pretty good job in that first response in those first 24 to 48 hours. I was really proud of what I saw. We also had great response elsewhere. I've said many times now, kudos to our folks in Washington County. Judge Deacon sent, 40 or 50 people up here from the road department with equipment. Sheriff Cantrell down there sent a number of deputies. I think there's 20 or so deputies that came up with equipment. And all they did is they came up and they said, where do we go? And we deployed them, and that was immensely helpful as well.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to stress for all of you and for all of our listeners is that the job isn't done, right? I mean, we are still working hard to get to where we want to be, which is to some type of normalcy that existed prior to the date of the tornado. And so, we certainly, and I know we talked about this offline, is just having the patience of our community and the support as you guys continue to do the yeoman's task that you're called to do in this season. So I want that. I just want to put that out there. Mayor Hines, I want to ask you specifically, because again, and this is a similar question that I could ask Mayor Orman, but Rogers has a unique mix of both commercial and residential areas. How did this diversity affect the way that your team approached the storm's response?
Yeah, well, so I would say for the first week, no difference, because trees down on houses and businesses are trees down on houses and businesses. I will say that as we progressed, as you got FEMA on the ground, as you got SBA on the ground, which we were fortunate enough to, I think, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, our federal delegation and specifically Congressman Womack, made sure, we had the administrator from FEMA on the ground in the first week in the wake of the event, as well as an SBA administrator. So, those are things that don't normally happen in communities. And so we were blessed to have those individuals on the ground to be able to see the exact impact this had on folks. And that, I think, in turn, probably affected their response. And so I think we were the benefactors of maybe a little larger initial response from our federal partners than we would have otherwise been. And so, that's where when things started to when all life is saved and power is restored and those things are done, then folks are trying to figure out how do I recover? How do I rebuild? How do I even, fix my roof? And unfortunately, I think, most of us probably have dealt with our insurance in the last several years, understanding that maybe our values and the appreciation of property had outpaced maybe where our insurance policies were. And so, unfortunately, what we're seeing now is that so many of these folks that had damage to property, both residential and commercial, were underinsured. And so, we also have a segment of population that was uninsured. When you think about some of the neighborhoods over by Northwest Park, where folks, owned their homes outright with no mortgage, some of them didn't carry insurance on their properties, and so all those stories are told and have to be, sort of kiosk and treated individually, and so. I think that, SBA's ability to come in, FEMA's ability to come in and add a gap for that underinsured portion And so this is also the first disaster that FEMA's had a new tool in the tool belt that started in March, where not only did they have a $45,000 per app amount, but they also had an additional $45,000 that was available for individuals to apply for underinsured. And so that's been immeasurable to tell you about the recovery of our residents. Businesses, you think about businesses that, you know, are mortgaged to the hilt, brand new construction or you know, reconstruction. And we had some of those that have been remodeled recently. So they've got maybe 1 or 2 mortgages on them. Now they're destroyed. How do you rebuild from that? How do you recover from that as a business owner and property owner? And then what we found out that's, you know, it seems obvious when you're not in the middle of a disaster, but so much of the commercial properties that were damaged were not owner occupied. So you've got double impact there, because you have a property owner that's lost their property, and then you have a business that has nowhere to operate out of. And those two things are separate. And the solutions for how you keep those folks propped up are totally separate as well. And so we found the complexities of trying to work with folks in those areas to be difficult, and something that we really haven't had to do before. So we're kind of you know, trying to write this playbook as we go.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a work in progress for sure. You know, I do have a question for you, Mayor Orman, and certainly Mayor Hines alluded to just the overall growth that his city has experienced. Bentonville has grown rapidly in recent years. How did this growth impact, or did it impact your city's ability to respond to the storm and the tornado in May? And what challenges, if any, did it present? And I'll say it by saying, I remember Bentonville when 2014, when I moved here, which was just 10 years ago. I know a lot of you have been here for a much longer time. It seems like a fundamentally different place today than it did even just 10 years ago. So I'd be curious to know that growth impact. How did that play a role in how your city, how you guys were able to respond to this storm?
Well, I think for our city, we really looked at where the impact was, right? So immediately, it wasn't necessarily across all parts of the city. And so I think our teams immediately shifted to where the impact was. So I don't know that the actual growth, because when you have a natural disaster or whatever type of disaster, you're going to immediately shift your team and all your resources to that. Now, with growth, that means we have more people to serve. We have more infrastructure, utilities, electricals, whatever it might be. So you definitely have to make sure you have the resources within your teams. And then you have to be willing to make sure you're making those calls to call in that mutual aid so that you can handle the circumstances. We were fortunate that I feel like we had a great response across the city. Initially, we got the public also was helping us respond. We got numerous accolades of how quickly we got roads open, how quickly we got electric back up. Our job as a city is to be I always tell you, people call the city when, you know, it's not their best day, right? So our job is to be that resource, and especially in the time of disaster. We want you calling us. We want you to be that resource. And I feel like we've been able to take care of the public. We will continue to be here to take care of the public and lead them through this. You're right. Many of them are still dealing with insurance. We've had to learn a lot through the process of how different entities have to apply for FEMA, and kind of talk to people and help them get through that process. So I do think our team has been phenomenal throughout all of this. We will continue to be that resource. And could we always use more resources? Absolutely, because we're a growing city and we're one of the best cities in the US, and that's why people want to come here. The resilience that I've seen from our city to be able to get to this point from recovery and continue to do business, have visitors in. We had a huge weekend this last weekend of people coming into our city, and I was talking to them, and I said, you know, we just had a tornado come through, and they said, but you have cleaned up the city amazingly, and we love being here. So I think it's just a testament to, again, to our team members. So growth, is going to happen in the city of Bentonville and across Northwest Arkansas, because people want to be here. We have the jobs. And so we also have the teams and the skill sets, I think, to be able to provide what we need to provide in the time of a disaster. And I'm really proud of everybody.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's like, you never know if you're going to be ready to deal with an event like this. But, you know, when you do, when the opportunity does arise and you're able to step into that moment and make a difference, then it does give you some assurances that, wow, we are moving in the right direction. Right. And I think Northwest Arkansas collectively can make that statement. We're not perfect, but we are a fast regional growing area. We're one of the fastest MSAs in the country. So there is something to be said for that. I have one question to ask Judge Moerhing, and then I want to acknowledge the fact that we do have, if you want to ask a question, you can. If you're listening to this right now and you have a specific question, I can't promise that I'll get to all of them, but we have 2 up already. Normally by this time we have like 30 up, but we only have 2. So don't be you know, bashful. Just ask your question. If I can get to it, I will. But certainly we'll try to address some of these. I want to get back to Judge Moerhing and have him address something that he talked about earlier, which was kind of the dichotomy of dealing with both urban, because he has a responsibility of both really heavily urban areas like Rogers and Bentonville, as well as those areas like Decatur. And I remember I was out of the country when this whole tornado happened, and I remember seeing, Judge, a picture of, I think there was a house in Decatur where the tornado had just gone through the middle of the house. And thankfully the people weren't home at the time. But how have you been able to navigate just kind of dealing with the differences between rural areas versus some of the more urban areas that we have here in Northwest Arkansas?
Yeah, it's an interesting role for the county judge in any county, but there's one part of your question is very easy to answer. So you have here today mayors of 2 cities that were incredibly prepared, equipped, staffed, resourced. So honestly, from a county perspective, worrying about Rogers and Bentonville is not on my plate, because they are well-run cities, responded immediately, were able actually to provide advice and assistance outside their city boundaries when needed. And so from a county judge perspective, our attention really turns to the more rural areas, because we know in the case of this disaster, where Bentonville and Rogers were our hardest hit large cities, that they were well accommodated and well taken care of. And our communication between the 3 of us and all of our mayors is really tight. So that's the first thing, is that I really don't have to think too much about Rogers and Bentonville, other than just collaborating and communicating. We need to stay in touch and make sure we all know what each other's doing. Shifting to the other areas, this is where there are amazing stories. And if you think about the rural areas, first of all, let's start with our smaller cities like Decatur and our volunteer fire departments, who frankly don't have the resources or the staffing of a Bentonville or Rogers. And those guys are responding voluntarily in the middle of the night, pitch black, out there in the storm. And there are some amazing tales of heroism, for example, from the Decatur Fire Department, as an example, or from our sheriff's department, what our sheriff's deputies did, from our road department out there cutting roads open to get ambulances back to people. Those are amazing stories in the rural areas, and that's where we focus a lot of our attention. And so from a Benton County standpoint, one of our obligations is to try within our resources to make sure that our volunteer fire departments are as equipped as well as we can help them to be, that our communications with them are really good. We respond to their 911 calls. Our central communications, our dispatch center, similar to what Stephanie alluded to earlier for Bentonville, and Rogers has one too. We service the whole county. And so our perspective really is much different. We don't have a county fire department. Our rural fire departments are our county fire department. And then there are instances, a lot of them, where cities like Rogers and Bentonville and mutual aid respond out in the county as well. And frankly, it worked well that night. And these are folks out in Decatur. Let's take Decatur, for example. The Decatur, I'm staring at a map on my wall. The Decatur Fire District is a big fire district, not resourced the way a city is. These are folks who responded to the call in the storm while a 1.9 mile wide tornado is going through their area. And that's remarkable. That's heroism. There were a lot of stories like that out there. Sean Holloway and I were in our dispatch center, our emergency communications center. We activate what's called our EOC, our emergency communications center. We were looking at our TV screens that are on the walls there that show all the calls coming in. And I'm sure Greg and Stephanie, they have the same setups in their EOC. You really couldn't even see the map of Benton County because there were so many icons on there for so many calls. And was remarkable because our job then is to deploy resources, ambulance resources, law enforcement resources, road department resources, volunteer fire department resources to the right place, the right time. And I just was heartened by, we're going to respond now and we're going to ask about it later. Like if resources are needed in the Decatur area, Gentry win, Siloam win, Sulphur win. And that's just the way it works out in rural Benton County. And I was really glad to hear that. And our part is really to kind of coordinate and help those resources get to the right place at the right time and to get those roads open, make sure there's law enforcement out there. And it might even be a little bit more chaotic than in the cities a little bit because multiple jurisdictions respond. But that night there was a lot of heroic things that happened, and I'm really proud of what I saw.
Yeah. And I want to follow up with that because given your role, your unique role of covering a much wider area, there was a question, the new general manager at KUAF, Clint Schaff, had asked specifically, and this would actually apply to any media outlet, but how might local media better support disaster preparation and response? And what would you, as a county judge, what would you like to see?
I've not been asked that question. I think that's an interesting question. And I might have to give it some thought, but I think initially, from a media perspective, I think the most important thing that media can do is prior to the storm. Make sure people have their own warning system. Make sure they have their own survival kit. There's all sorts of resources out there online, et cetera, about, what should you have on hand? When the storm hit that night, I was in my basement under our stairs with my wife and our dogs. My daughter had called and said, "Hey, Mom, make sure those dogs are tied up around your waist." Because she had gotten she's in Columbia, Missouri, but she had gotten the notification, watching, in this case, Dan Scoff on the TV in the basement, lights go out, noise hit our house like we had never heard before. And it wasn't a tornado, it was hail and wind. And that's when I got the call from my public safety administrator, said, "You need to call this number in Little Rock right now and declare an emergency." That was about 1:45 in the morning. And that's a scary, scary time. And there were thousands of people across Benton County facing that same situation. The media can help in preparation for the individuals, because at the end of the day, when that storm's coming, you as a household, you as an individual need to be ready. I think the media can help there. I think they have helped there, by the way. But if I had to pick a spot right away, that would be it. I also think we'll probably talk a little bit more about the recovery efforts afterwards. And I think in that arena, that's probably where our playbook was lacking the most. I think we ended up in a good spot, but we could do better there. And part of how we could do better is in asking the media for help in that area.
Yeah. I also can think just off the top of my head is sometimes those really simple PSAs about making sure you've got your batteries and your flashlight, making sure you have an emergency plan in your home, what to do when just to make sure everybody in the family is able to check in, because those are simple things that we never think about until the hits the fan. And I think media as an outlet all of the media could serve the public by just doing those little simple PSAs to remind them, especially in an area like we're in here in Northwest Arkansas.
So true. That night after, while I was making the call to Little Rock, my wife was on the phone with her brother-in-law and sister-in-law who live here in Bentonville. And they were terrified, and their house essentially got destroyed. They're out of the house for 18 months. Fortunately, they weren't hurt. But probably the longest walk in my life, or at least for this year, was coming out of my basement, walking up the stairs to my first floor, wondering, what the heck am I going to see up here? But we actually had a kit down there in the basement. Like, if it's possible, I could have been stuck in the house. We had a kit. We were ready to go for a while. We had communications and we had some basics. Really, the media's help in making sure that people understand that would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, great question. Thank you for that. So I do have another question that came up, and since this question was actually directed at Mayor Greg Hines, I actually had a question for you, Mayor Greg. So I'll ask this first one. You mentioned specifically about the $45,000 FEMA assistance and the 45,000 plus 45,000 FEMA assistance that you mentioned. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that specifically as you're aware of it? Because I know you may not know every aspect of it, but could you just speak to that? And then I have a follow-up question for you after that.
Yeah, well, first I'll preface by saying I absolutely don't know everything there is to know about that, and I'm not employed by FEMA. But from my understanding, and if I'm not mistaken, I think has that window closed? Barry, can you? Yeah, that window's closed. So the window's closed to. Say that again.
The application period has closed. I
Yeah,
think there's
the application period is closed, but the processing period is open through, I think, through Q2 2025. But that application process was any individual could go and take their narrative, their story, their situation, and sit down with a FEMA representative who helped them or filled out the application for them in person. And then depending on the circumstance of uninsured, underinsured, or other sort of circumstances that were outside of their control, they could qualify for those. But the SBA loan, more specifically, is important to note, because I had an impression that SBA, it's the Small Business Administration, right? And so, if I'm going to open a small business, that's an avenue for me. But if I find myself in a situation where my insurance is not, or I don't have insurance, and I've got to get a mortgage to rebuild my home, SBA actually offers those. They offer long-term loans at fixed low interest rates. And so it was not just a tool for businesses, but absolutely an essential tool for homeowners. And I mean, when I say low fixed interest rates, I'm talking like 3.5% to 4.5% that went up to 30 years.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. So before I give you my follow-up question, as I promised, it's 9:32. I do want to announce two winners of the $100 Walmart gift cards, and I want to thank Walmart for their support. Alicia Buttrey, and if I mispronounced your name, I apologize. And Katie Scott. If you're still here, you need to respond in the comments, and we'll make sure we get this information to you. We already have your email addresses, but we need you to confirm in the affirmative that you're still here, and we'll get you those $100 gift cards for Walmart. Congratulations again. So thank you for being here and for participating. Mayor Greg, I want to ask you this question. This is something that I'm going to ask of all three of you, but can you share a story about an individual or business in Rogers that made a remarkable impact during the recovery process? And why was their involvement so crucial? And I'm sure you've got a million stories, but just share with us one that really kind of moves the needle for you.
Yeah, I mean, there are countless numbers of those stories, and I'm gonna choose to pick this one only because it just underscores and shows the level of cooperation from our large employers. In the wake of the storm, all of our traffic signals were out, and they were out for days and days. And so we were running our traffic signals with generators. On-site delivered generators that require someone to go around and refuel them and make sure that they're not stolen. And Michael Lindsay with Government Affairs at Walmart reached out to me very early on and said, if there's something that we can do to help you, please don't hesitate to call and ask. And so after checking around and trying to borrow and cobble together as many generators as we could, it became very clear that we were not going to be able to locally source and obtain enough generators to get us through until power could be restored, at which time we didn't know at the point. And so Walmart stepped up in a huge way and sourced the generators and worked out a deal with some of their drivers to work through the night. So they drove through the night to get those generators delivered to us sort of next day, allowing us to get our traffic system up and running as if it was normal. And that's one example, but it's a big example of folks stepping up and really putting their money where their mouth is by delivering in the middle of the disaster when our greatest need was there.
Yeah. Yeah. Mayor Orman, I imagine you have somebody in mind, as I'm sure, just like Mayor Hines, there's probably a million people that you could think of, but I'd love for you to maybe highlight somebody that went the extra mile during the recovery efforts and made a significant contribution to the Bentonville community.
Sure. Well, we had numerous organizations step up. One of the things we did from my office was try to connect sort of all of the volunteer efforts to individuals. So, and we tried to focus on those that had, their complete homes destroyed and different things and make those connections. I am going to go back to our employees through this process though, because they were here 24/7 throughout it. And so we do have an individual within our team that is the team lead on the FEMA process. And he has stepped up. He's also done it pretty much 24/7 through a death in the family and other things, and he's continued to show up every day. And so Mike Bender is that person on our staff that has truly been phenomenal. He also had family members hit extremely hard the night of the storm, got them out of there, got them to a safe place, and then showed up at our command center to run the water and sewer portions of those disasters. So phenomenal team member and really showed up.
Hey, Randy?
Yes.
So I don't want to take any time away from Judge Moerhing, but I just, with the fact that you mentioned in her question individual, and I sort of went the business route, I'd be terribly remiss if I didn't mention Dr. Jeff Perry with the Rogers Public Schools. They set up a shelter almost immediately after this, in the wake of the storm at Rogers High School, which did have power. That shelter ran with not just meals and not just showers and not just recharging your cell phone, not just a place to stay cool. People spent the night there. His staff, the students of Rogers Public Schools, volunteers to the community came together. And here's the important thing about that is, and I think Stephanie and Barry would agree with me, we're not equipped to set up shelters. That's really not what we do. And so to have someone like Dr. Perry take on that leadership role and set that up in our schools was untold to this day impact on folks in our community. Thousands and thousands of meals served out of there. Tyson Foods again set up some meals. And so I think that the underscored statement is just that large and small corporations, businesses, and individuals that stepped up to make a huge impact in an area that's maybe not necessarily directly in their wheelhouse. So a lot of heroes in the wake of this storm.
Yeah, well, I mean, and this was actually one of the questions that, of course, because when you think of Northwest Arkansas, and one of the things I always talk about on my podcast is just the community and collaborative spirit that we have here in this area. And I know some people think, oh, well, that's just, you're just saying that, but what you're describing is this is what it looks like in reality, right? And I think people need to hear that sometimes because, I think as individuals, sometimes we feel alone. We feel that we're by ourselves and, whatever issues we have to deal with, it's all on us. But in reality, there is a big village out there that's looking to support us. And just what you described with Dr. Jeff Perry and the Rogers Public School System, those things make a difference. They really do. And Judge Moerhing, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that with regard, because I'm sure you have a million stories as well. But I just think it's important for us to hear these stories.
You know, there are so many. I'll start with two of our smaller town mayors that really stepped up. So we don't talk a whole lot about Little Flock, but Little Flock was decimated. And Mayor Van Sickler in Little Flock, who lost his city hall, gone, did an amazing job in that community, rallying his folks, being in communication with me, asking for resources and working through issues. So Mayor Van Sickler did a great job. Another really amazing job was done by Mayor Tharp out in Decatur. And what's amazing about that is Decatur, the city, wasn't especially hit, but the surrounding area was. And I was on the phone with Bob Tharp very, very early on that morning. And he's like, we're out there, we're helping. These are our people too. And his fire chief of the Decatur Volunteer Fire Department, Chief Gunner Joey, house to house, tearing down walls and getting to people and getting them out. The Decatur Baptist Church, Glenda out there, set up basically headquarters for relief in Decatur was the Decatur Baptist Church. That's just where you knew where to go. Next thing you know, Simmons Foods is out there cooking meals and getting things done. And when that wasn't close enough, the Falling Springs Church out on Falling Springs Road, which was particularly decimated, and David out there hosting a FEMA temporary or mobile disaster recovery center, hosting showers. We were moving showers and getting those out there. Yeah, I could go on and on. I mean, those are four that come to mind. We had some folks from our state delegation. I'll call out Senator Tyler Dees, State Representative Delia Hawk. They were on the ground out there every single day, volunteering, working, doing whatever it took. So that we could go on and on, but the list is amazing.
Yeah.
And these are people who, on May 25th, none of us expected to be doing this. And yet on May 26th and beyond, they were doing it.
Yeah, well, there's a word, I think it's actually two unsung heroes, right? People that just show up when you least expect it. And so certainly I thank everybody that the three of you all mentioned and organizations that you mentioned. I want to thank them all personally on behalf of everyone here in Northwest Arkansas, because certainly it's always good to acknowledge the people that are making a difference. We've talked a little bit about it, and I know there are a lot of people that have questions about this. And it was a good question posed in the audience, and I do want to ask, it's Katie Cascamo has asked, given the widespread challenges in working with insurance companies to get claims paid, and it's kind of like that sometimes in a normal situation, not even just in a tornado, but what strategies can be developed to build a community-based peer support program where those experienced in storm recovery mentor and guide those new to the process? And I actually think that's a great question, because there are people that are skilled with these things, right? Some of us that have never made a claim on our home insurance have no idea what to do. But there are some people that have been through this, and I'd be curious to know, and any one of you can chime in on this particular question about some type of peer-led storm recovery program for just community individuals.
I'll chime in and say I think that's a great recommendation, and I know Mayor Hines and Judge Moerhing and I and really most of the Benton County mayors and some of the Washington County mayors get on a monthly call, and these are the type of topics that I'd like for us to kind of visit about, like how can we come together and put a resource pool. Now that we've been through it, we're seeing what all the challenges are with it, like how do we put a resource pool together, so hopefully we're better prepared, or we at least have that mentorship to move through something again. I think it definitely is a learning process. I'm out there with many others still fighting with the insurance to try to figure out, the final resolution on it. So I understand it from a personal aspect, but it is challenging. It is definitely frustrating for the public. And right now we're kind of in that point where we've done most of our right-of-way pickup and cleanup and different things, and we're really working with those individuals that are very hard hit, and they're trying to figure this out and work through the insurance process. And so I would encourage sort of a peer mentorship group that comes together, maybe that the mayors and the county judge, and everybody can come together around and have a resource for.
Yeah. And that actually may even be a situation where the media can help out with that to get the word
Absolutely.
out. So yeah, that's something else. So Clint, I hope you're listening to that. So I'm sorry, somebody else had something to add?
Well, I was just going to say, when I look at these sort of approaches to solving problems, we have strong chambers of commerce in the Northwest Arkansas region, and that initiative sort of rings a bell to me that chambers of commerce could pull from their membership base and likely come up with a group of folks that could offer that type of assistance for both businesses and advice for individuals. I will tell you that my personal experience in this is that our insurance companies are changing daily, their policies, their coverages. None of them are alike. Used to you kind of in your homeowners insurance, you could kind of do apples to apples between the 5 or 6 major companies, and you can't do that anymore. We've got tangerines, oranges, and bananas, and you can't make heads or tail of the coverage in many cases, and that's by design, because these companies have been taking it on the short given the number of natural disasters that we have faced in this country. And so I think this is a fluid conversation. I think personal insurance, business insurance, replacement versus repair, like all of those things are things that we as individuals, we as the community are going to have to really get laser focused on. We've got over $33.5 million worth of damage just to city buildings and facilities that we're working through with our insurance company right now. And so, and we'll be doing this probably for the next couple of years. So this is not a next week, next month, end of 24. This is a multi-year process for us.
Yeah. Judge Moerhing, you want to add on?
Yeah, I do, because this has been one of the more confounding issues coming out of this. And I think what Mayor Orman and Mayor Hines have both said are absolutely correct. But what I would add to that is and this is a hard conversation with the public, and particularly with private citizens. The hard conversation is to have that conversation about where government assistance ends and where, if you're an individual citizen, where your obligation begins. Those lines get very, very blurry in the wake of a disaster. Keeping in mind that all of us are resource constrained. I think people find out that FEMA is resource constrained. You find out that we found out all of us did, there are very strict rules as a government for what you can and cannot do to assist individuals in a way where you'll be reimbursed by the federal government. And we have an obligation to make sure that all of our finances are accounted for, that we remain financially strong entities, that we remain solvent. I mean, there are nightmare stories around the country of entities that did the wrong thing and ended up putting their municipality or their county in rough financial shape. We have an obligation to make sure that doesn't happen. That's a hard discussion to have with somebody who's got 65 trees down on their 10-acre parcel out on the west side of the county, and the county government in this case, is not going to go pick those up. We can't do that. So you had asked earlier about preparation, or we talked a little bit about preparation. In addition to having that kit in your basement ready to go, one of the things that at least I'm doing personally and encouraging everybody, understand your coverage. Ask hard questions of your agent. The first thing that FEMA will ask you is, have you contacted your insurance company? Do you have insurance? And that is, when it comes to the financial implications after a disaster, individuals really need to understand where they're covered and where they're not, and how they can shore that up. And what I've also discovered, I think Greg alluded to this, insurance companies are not created equal. I'm not going to say play favorites, not my role, but I've heard incredibly good stories about some companies, and I've heard the opposite about other companies. So please, it's a private sector market. Please go shop around, ask hard questions, and make sure you understand what happens afterwards if you're staring at a damaged or destroyed house.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's one of those reminders that we probably need to hear said a few times before it really stays in our mind and it causes us to act on it. I do want to acknowledge we have two more winners before we close out this event. I want to welcome Wes Wilbright and Annetta Tyree. You guys are both winners of $100 gift cards for Walmart. And just acknowledge yourself here, and we will make sure we get those cards to you right away, and make sure that you have those. And again, we want to thank you, Wes and Annetta, for participating in this event, and we hope that you've gotten something out of this. I did want to bring something up that we talked about on our planning call for this, Judge Moerhing, and that was, you mentioned something about rebuilding sufficient to require an inspection. And I know that there are a lot of issues that have come up, and I don't know if there is a pattern of challenges that you've seen in the county that people need to think about and how they might address some of those challenges, or maybe the same issue has come up over and over again. And,
Yeah.
you know, this is your megaphone right now to speak about it specifically and say, hey, this is how you might want to think about addressing this.
And this is one of those issues that's going to linger for folks. When you rebuild a structure, depending upon how extensive it is, you may very well be obligated to go through our inspection and permitting process. That'll be true in the cities as well. We're trying to be very forgiving on allowing people to forego inspections and permits for things that are still there. Plumbing's the same. If your slab's the same. We're also trying to give one-on-one attention to those who are going through this process. But if your house is destroyed, yeah, you're gonna have to go through an inspection and permitting process. And in the county, the challenge there is we've had houses that have been destroyed that originally did not have to go through that process by the same property owner who now has to go through that process by law. That's a challenge. And I think we've had a few enough of those examples. We have fewer than 300 homes destroyed across the county. I should say that will require inspection. It's not fully destroyed. Significant damage to destroyed. That we can work with a lot of those individuals one-on-one and step them through our process. I imagine in the cities, that's a real challenge. The entire neighborhoods where houses are going to have to be rebuilt, redone, re-inspected, re-permitted. And yeah, that's going to be a challenge for folks going forward. But it's also what I encourage people to keep in mind is this is for the safety of the community now and the community going forward. Somebody's going to buy that house. Somebody's going to live in that house. Somebody's going to expect it to be safe. And so that's in large part why those rules are in place, those laws. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Anything you guys want to add, Mayor Orman, Mayor Hines, on that specifically?
I would just add, I mean, we just, we've heard from the public in some specific instances where our building inspectors have come out. They, obviously contractors come in during a disaster. And so there were some concerns. Our building inspectors are able to come in and kind of help them through that process. It's a confusing process. You've got all kinds of different bids coming in to get the work done. And so I think that's what I hope the public knows is that the city should be a resource for you. And our building inspectors in many instances have been that resource to help make sure the public, as they get a contractor on board, is doing the work properly, doing it toward to code so that they get a proper construction from the contractor. And I think that's a really important piece of this, that the city is your resource to help you move through this and make sure things get done right. And it's not because we want to come out and enforce code more, it's because we want to protect the homeowner in this process.
Yeah, that's why it's there. Mayor Hines?
Yeah, so you know, we've implemented some temporary policies that that the council allowed me some leeways in being nimble, and so we're kind of doing the, you know, tie goes to the runner and try to be very sensitive about people that are processing applications that relate to storm damage versus some other new construction. I'll tell you one thing we ran into that's really frustrating. So we've got some folks that want to rebuild a detached building on their property. Their parcels, they've got one parcel that's a meets and bounds and one parcel that's a lot block. And they're trying to come back in and rebuild those. And so there are challenges, like they're going to have a survey likely. And so there's going to be some of those stories of frustration. But again, as Barry said, all of these measures are in place to protect the entire community. and to ensure that in the future, folks can have confidence that legal descriptions are correct and that buildings are conforming structures and those sorts of things. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, I think it's important to know, even just like if you're building or adding something onto your current structure or adding an ADU or something like that, you always want that inspection process to take place, because a lot of times that's that system of checks and balances that we all need to make sure that we're building something proper and it's a structure that's gonna stand the test of time. So I appreciate all of you adding that. And there are just so many questions here that we could ask. I do want to ask one specific question, and if you guys could just give me maybe a 1 or 2 word answer for this, and this is going to be a tough one, but there were a number of people that wondered just about just the fact that you know, that this was a very trying experience for each of you individually. What would you say would be the one leadership thing that you took away or you got out of this process that you learned about yourself in dealing with this event? And Mayor Hines, since you're already right here on camera, I'm going to ask you to answer that first.
Well, for me, I think as I've reflected back, and it's probably just trusting the life experience that I've had.
Yeah. Okay. Mayor Orman?
I think it's just you have to be flexible, you have to show up and you have to get it done and you have to be responsive to the public. And so that's a motivation for me as well. And so I hope that's what the public has seen from our response here in the city of Bentonville.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how about you, Judge Moerhing?
Yeah, I think there are two things. One is, I would say, collaboration at so many levels, including right here at this level, was so important. And I love that word trust, because we all had to really trust what was happening way out of our eyesight and know that the right people were doing the right things at the right time. And so this community was very collaborative. The folks on this call were very collaborative. And I had an endless amount of trust in the people on my team and all the other teams that they were out there getting it done. There didn't need to be any supervision or paperwork. They just went. They ran to the scene. And that was just really impressive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. So just to give you guys some flowers as we move forward, we had a couple of people give some really nice comments, really more than anything else. They really weren't questions, but Philip Patterson said, "Thank you, Judge Moerhing, Mayor Orman, and Mayor Hines for your hard work and dedication to our communities in Benton County. You are making a positive difference in the lives of many." There were just a lot of people that that had a really nice acknowledgments about the work that you guys have done and are currently doing. Visiting Angels said, "Stick a feather in your caps. Our seniors that were impacted all had available resources within less than 24 hours of impact. Fine work." So, you know, there were a lot of people that really appreciated the work that you guys have done, and there's still work to be done. And on that, as we close out here, and I only have 2 minutes left, can you each share just a simple piece of advice and or encouragement for your constituents in terms of those that are still in the throes of dealing with the fallout of the storm? Maybe their homes have not, they still have tarps on parts of their roof or whatever. I mean, I've driven through Rogers and I've seen some of the things that have not been taken care of. And I'll let you go first, Judge Moerhing.
And I would want to leave a lot of time for Greg and Stephanie here. We're still working this problem. Our offices are still taking calls. And if you still have issues that haven't been resolved, at the very least, we'll be an ear to listen to them. And if we can help get you through them, we'll do our best to do that. In the county, our physical destruction wasn't as great as what they've experienced in the city. So I'll pass it on to them.
Okay. All right. Mayor Orman.
I just want the public to know that we're here for you. We want to be your resource. We understand that this is kind of a long-term recovery in for many people. And it can be frustrating. We're learning a lot along the process as well. And if we can communicate that back to the public and make those connections for them, talked about the collaboration piece of this. I think a lot of people want to help. So if we can connect the person that needs the help to the resources, we want to be able to do that for you in the city of Bentonville. And ultimately, we want to be able to move forward better through this process and show how resilient all of the communities here in Northwest Arkansas are.
Yeah. Mayor Hines, I'll let you land the plane.
Yeah, so just, super tragic event, an emotionally tragic event that most people in Rogers have never lived through. It's not dissimilar to having a death in the family in many ways, because we are all going through a mourning process and a stress debriefing process, and we're doing it in our own pace. Not everybody processes these things in the same time and in the same way. So my parting message, to use your terms, landing the plane, is I'm just encouraging everybody I talk to extend grace and space to your neighbors, your family, your coworkers, because this is going to be in many cases, a years-long recovery. So let's meet people where they are, give them space and grace, and all try to get through this together better than we were before the storm.
That's Rogers Mayor Greg Hines. I want to thank Bentonville Mayor Stephanie Orman and Benton County Judge Barry Moerhing for participating in this very great Onward Ozarks session today. Also want to thank Rob Smith, Nate Green, and Nelson Peacock and the Northwest Arkansas Council for even having this discussion in the first place. We appreciate all of you that participated today. And if you didn't, and you know somebody that needs to see this, share with them the video when the link comes out, and it will come out very soon, and you will be able to find it on the NWA Council website. I'm Randy Wilburn, and I will see you at another Onward Ozarks in the very near future. Thank you guys so much. Have an amazing Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.